This Shabbat, we're going to be reading the words Echa twice. The first times we're going to read the word Echa is in the Kriyat Torah for Parashat Devarim, where Moshe says, Echa es salevadi, tarchachem, masachem, verivchem. How can I handle by myself all of your quarrels, all the quarrels of Bnei Yisrael? And the second Echa we're going to read is in this week's Haftarah, where Yeshayahu says, Echa haitale zonah. How is it that Israel has become like a zonah? And the midrash in Echa Rabbah takes these two Echas and attaches them to Megillat Echa, where it gives us a mashal of a matrona, a noblewoman who has 3 shushbinim, who has 3 servants or aides. The first aide sees her b'shalvata, sees her in her tranquility, in her peacefulness. The second aide sees her b'pachazuta, in her decline, in her moral depravity. And the third aide sees her b'nivula, in her destruction, in her downfall. And the nishal here is Moshe is like the first aide who sees Bnei Yisrael in her tranquility. And Yeshayahu is like the second aide who sees Bnei Yisrael in their moral decline. And Yirmiyahu is the third aide who sees Bnei Yisrael in her destruction. And there's, from this midrash, we get the minhag that the line of Echa salevadi, we lane in the trop of Echa, and we do the Haftarah also in the trop of Echa. And there's a lot to be said on this midrash. There's a lot of questions that arise, but I think the most straightforward question I have is, why are we describing what Moshe is seeing as the shalva of Bnei Yisrael, as the tranquility of Bnei Yisrael? Moshe is complaining, or not complaining, but lamenting that he doesn't have the tools to handle all of the quarrels, all of the arguments of Bnei Yisrael. And to me, arguments do not scream tranquility. I think that midrash, in its most straightforward sense, is teaching us a lesson about what Bnei Yisrael was quarreling about. In a certain sense, I think the midrash is trying to say that the quarrels of Bnei Yisrael were trivial, or at least trivial compared to the destruction of Yerushalayim, or trivial to the moral decay that Yeshayahu is describing. And that in a certain sense, there's a tranquility, there's like a privilege to be able to lament over trivial things. And if you take that and you read it back into the Psukim, I think it fits really well. Moshe's complaint about not having enough help with the quarrels of Bnei Yisrael and therefore needing to set up his justice system immediately precedes Bnei Yisrael's request to go to scout out the land of Israel. And I think a lesson from this midrash can be applied to that as well. That the things that Bnei Yisrael were the things that Bnei Yisrael were complaining about were ultimately trivial things about the land. And this is a theme that's reflected in other midrashim. For example, the midrash on Bachot Tivcha Balayla, where Bnei Yisrael cried that night that the Meraglim came back. And Kadosh Baruch Hu says, tonight you cried over something trivial, over something that didn't deserve your tears. So in the future, you will cry over something that does deserve your tears. And the midrash relays that the Meraglim came back on Tisha B'Av and gave their negative report of Eretz Yisrael on Tisha B'Av. And so the triviality of Bnei Yisrael's complaints is something that we see all over the midrash. And I think it's a wonderful lesson for us entering the 9 days, entering this time period of working on our Ahavat Chinam, working on ourselves, doing teshuvah, doing our cheshbon nefesh, is that oftentimes when we are looking at the world, we have a very myopic perspective, a perspective of what's happening right now. But I think sometimes when we take a step back and we look at things from more bird's eye, we look at things in a larger context, we can see that the things that are bothering us, the things that we're complaining about, are ultimately trivial. And I think that is the heart of getting to Ahavat Chinam, is realizing that while our experience of what is bothering us is very real, when we take a step back, we can ultimately acknowledge that our complaints, the things bothering us, are ultimately trivial. And when we're able to acknowledge that, then we're able to move on and forgive each other and be one nation.